The emergence of COVID-19 has forced the legal industry to rapidly undergo a fundamental transformation. I'm Jack Newton, CEO and co-founder of Clio, the world's leading cloud-based legal software provider. In each episode of Daily Matters, we'll explore what this new normal means for law firms, how legal professionals can find success while working remotely, and how lawyers can best serve their clients during this unprecedented situation. Today's guest is Chris Gruenke, principal at CPN Legal, which specializes in law firm accounting and bookkeeping. Chris, thanks so much for joining us.
Well, thank you for having me.
Chris, first of all, how are you and your family doing?
We're doing very well. Thank you for asking. It's been like everyone, an interesting couple of months, but things are well here in Cincinnati.
That's great, and I'm so glad to hear that. And in these uncertain times, I'm curious, what is most on your mind right now?
Well, in our world, we are empty nesters, so we aren't challenged with the having to be school teachers as well as professionals at the same time. So
I envy you for that.
Yeah, I my heart goes out to everybody who's doing both. So really, it's been a time where we've been very focused on the business and on trying to help our clients navigate through the financial parts of the whole situation that's going on.
That's great, and would love to dig there a little bit more. Can you tell us a little bit more about the work that CPN Legal does in general, and in particular how you work with companies like Clio, Amicus Attorney, and QuickBooks?
Sure. So our business, we do bookkeeping for small to mid-sized law firms on an outsourced basis. We're located in Cincinnati. Our clients are all over the country, a few in Canada, and really, we built our practice around the intersection of Clio and QuickBooks. So we've become very adept at making those two pieces of software work together and getting that Clio sync to QuickBooks set up in a way that really has a lot of controls around it and really produces financial reports on the QuickBooks side and ties Clio into your banking activity. So that's kind of what we specialize in. And then as we meet up with clients, they oftentimes retain us to get that started, but then we end up kind of becoming their virtual bookkeeping, virtual invoicing service.
That's really interesting. So when you're working with firms in this mode, you don't require physical access to their office, or you don't need to sit down beside them in person. You're doing this all on a completely remote basis?
Virtually all of our clients are outside of Cincinnati. Yeah. So we've got a few in town. Probably 95+% are not in Cincinnati. We do everything with, and probably 98% of our clients are Clio. So, they're used to working in the cloud. We're used to working in the cloud. It's QuickBooks Online. We do everything that way.
And to talk about the Clio and QuickBooks connection for a few minutes, I'm curious, what do you see as the common pitfalls there, or what are some of the aspects of getting the Clio and QuickBooks relationship off to a good start? Is maybe a different way of framing it.
Yeah. So the sync itself works really well. So it's very smooth to take the information in Clio and have it push over into QuickBooks. The real struggle that most people face is really not getting the accounts in QuickBooks set up properly, and then not kind of syncing things into the right place in QuickBooks,
right,
in a way that lets you tie back to what's really happening at the bank, and then be able to kind of keep QuickBooks in order when Clio is continuing to put more information in there.
Right. Yeah, I think that's an important point. Unlike some other syncs, like maybe Google Calendar, for example, that's just kind of a fire and forget. You set it up and there's really no setup to be done beyond just turning it on. QuickBooks is really a matter of doing some advanced planning and what you're going to sync, how you're going to map the data, and that sets you up with a a strong foundation for success. And we'll leave that topic there. I want our listeners to know, though, if that's an integration they're struggling with, CPN Legal is a great place to go if you need support. The other place we've been working with you and Peggy, Chris, is on the navigating the government programs that are available to small businesses and small law firms amidst the COVID-19 crisis. Can you tell us a little bit more about the work you've been doing on that front?
Sure. So we focused with the Clio team. We've put on a few webinars now, and we've got a couple more coming up. Really, just to provide a forum for people who have questions about it or who are stuck in some place and wanting to get a little bit of a hand on, where can I turn next? For our clients, the background for that, I guess, is really for our clients, we've helped them go through two of the main government programs towards the size of business that encompasses our client base. And that's there's an economic injury from disaster loan, and there's the Paycheck Protection Program. And those are two parts of what's called the CARES Act, which was the big $2 trillion legislation from about a month or a month and a half ago. And they work a little bit differently, but as always with those things, they are, just in case people aren't aware, they are loans that can be forgiven. So it's a way to, the US government wanted to find a way to encourage small businesses to maintain their staffing levels. And so the notion is, if we could bridge this gap while everybody is quarantined or while business is so disruptive, that it would be able to come back quickly. So they set up this program that then says, here, we'll loan you money to keep people on payroll. And if you do that, then we will forgive that loan, and it will end up being, a grant basically that just helped you through as a small business to maintain your payroll. So there are, like all such programs, a lot of ins and outs, and there are criteria you have to meet, and you have to check certain boxes. And so really that's where a lot of my time has been spent over the past month, is helping our clients understand those things, and then setting up the kind of tracking processes and the things that we need to do to A, get people applied and approved, and then B, to make sure that they are working their way towards that spot in a couple of months from now when they could ask the bank to forgive those loans because they've followed the intentions of the program.
Right. So these are two, really unprecedented in human history programs that the government has rolled out. I don't think we've ever seen, certainly not in my lifetime, any kind of aid going out to small businesses on the scale that it is with the CARES Act. And I'm curious. The headlines around these programs have been very hard to keep track of. There's been so much rapid change. You read on one day about the CARES Act, being approved by Congress, the PPP program going live, and then swiftly running out of funds, a few days afterwards, and so on. Can you just tell us a little bit about, from your perspective, where you've been very close to this, how you've seen the evolution of these programs and maybe some of the speed bumps they've hit along the way?
So I think the headlines are pretty reflective of the entire gamut of the experience we've had with the PPP. On the one hand, there were a lot of times when people couldn't get onto the website, or when the banks were trying to submit things to the SBA and they were unable to get onto the SBA website. And so there's all kinds of fodder for like the what went wrongs.
Right.
But there's also like the incredible amount of loans that have actually gotten out the door when you compare that to the kind of business as usual Small Business Administration loan programs. And you occasionally hear those headlines. I wish we'd maybe hear a few more of those, because it actually is quite stunning what they've been able to accomplish, and that they've gotten money into so many businesses' hands. And sometimes that may not sell as many newspapers as hearing about the tragic side of things. And trust me, there's plenty of the tragic side of things to go around. But we've probably had, I'm going to say maybe 75% of our clients actually have received funds. We've
That's
got,
phenomenal.
yeah, it's amazing. And there are, in our world, there are funds that are needed. I mean, they're everybody's at, when the courts are closed and a lawyer can't practice, you start wondering, maybe not for today because you are working on some current matter, but for tomorrow and next month, you have to be looking at the not too distant horizon to start seeing, some real challenges. And for some folks that are 100% court driven, those challenges happened almost immediately. So the fact that they were able to get funds and able to retain their employees is, it's really quite special. So it's been kind of great to be able to be helping them along that path.
Yeah, and fully agree. I think that's a great thing to hear. And I think what you're commenting on contrasts pretty strongly with some of the headlines out there, like you said, that are maybe good for selling newspapers, but they induce a little bit of a sense of, I think in many people, defeatism, where they don't even try applying for these programs because they hear the stories about how the funds getting exhausted or got exhausted. They read the headlines about how it seems like there's this preferential, and potentially backroom dealing going on where maybe the wrong folks are getting these grants. But you're seeing success with 3/4 of your clients that have applied, and these are the ma and pa law firms of Main Street, USA. They're not connected
Right.
politically in any way. They're not pulling favors. You're not pulling any strings in the background. Is that fair to say? These are legitimate one-off applications from people that
Absolutely.
don't have any special cheat code to access these programs.
Yep. I mean, we're talking about law firms. Our client base, ranges from solos and up to firms that probably have, I don't know, 30 or 40 people in them, something like that. So, we're not talking about mega companies or the headline producing Shake Shack and
Right.
Ruth's Chris and that kind of stuff. We're talking about entrepreneurs who have hung a shingle, maybe with a few partners, and they're out there, every day trying to figure it out and trying to keep their staff cared for and employed and take care of their clients. And so, these are really the people that the program was designed to help.
Well, that's very heartening news. And without talking about any specific clients, can you just share generally what you're seeing in terms of the amount of relief being provided, and maybe in turn what kinds of commitments your clients are making to receive those loans, and then as you mentioned, downstream making sure that they're eligible to have those loans waived essentially and converted into grants?
Sure. So let me talk about the two programs a little bit independently.
Sure.
The one is the economic injury from a disaster. That loan program a part of that program is up to a $10,000 grant kind of immediately. This is part of what's been in place for disaster recovery for a long time through the SBA. So if you think about like a hurricane or a natural disaster, the tornado sweeps through town and destroys all the buildings.
Right.
That program, when you hear that the president declared such and such a disaster area, that kicks that program into high gear, and they try and help the businesses affected by that disaster.
And that's the EIDL program.
That's the EIDL program, and that's
okay.
directly through the SBA.
Got it.
In this case, the distinction is all 50 states have been declared a disaster area relative to COVID. So that, kind of made it available to everyone.
I see.
Those funds, there really aren't a lot of restrictions around, because again, that's kind of like that natural disaster thing. So it wasn't really designed for staff retention as much as it was just like, wow, this tornado just hit and I need some help. Those funds, those loan sizes they tend to be, they max out, I should say, at $1,000 per employee with a maximum of $10,000.
Okay.
So what we see from that a lot is somebody's applied to the SBA, they fill out the information on the website, and then one day, a week or so later, there is a deposit from the SBA for $6,000 or $3,000. And it's like, that was the money from the EIDL. The PPP is a lot bigger endeavor. So there you actually apply to a bank. You have to do some payroll calculations to show how big of a payroll company you are and how much money would equate to 2.5 months worth of your payroll.
Mm-hmm.
Once you apply for that, the bank submits it to the SBA. The money comes into you sign a loan document, and the money comes into your account. In our world, we've seen those for probably as low as $15,000 or $20,000, and as high as right around $400,000.
Wow.
Program-wise, as far as the PPP overall, as you said, there have been 2 rounds of the PPP. So in the first tranche of funding, the average loan size was something like $206,000 across all businesses, including the giant ones.
Mm-hmm.
And that program, by the way, had a max loan amount of $10 million. So, you could have some really big numbers skewing that. In this second round, they purposely tried to gear things more and more towards the smaller businesses. They did that by a couple of things. Notably, they reserved funds for smaller lenders. So they reserved a lot of the funds that the big banks couldn't touch, and only things like credit unions or small community banks could actually submit for those. So this round, the average so far, I think I just saw, was 79,000. So that's a drop from 200 something down to 79 as an average size loan. So it
substantial drop.
Seems as though they've accomplished some of what they set out to do of really trying to skew that towards the smaller businesses.
And are those funds still available and new applicants are being processed, Chris?
Yeah. So the second tranche of money was a total of $310 billion. And the last numbers I saw were from Sunday, and they had loaned out about 175 of that 310 billion.
Okay.
Obviously, there's a lot still in the pipeline and everything else, but our message to our clients or to the folks who join us on these webinars is, as of right now, it's not too late. So if you have not gotten in there yet, and you have not worked through the application process, and if you need if you need the money to continue your payroll, that we would encourage people to continue to apply.
Yeah, absolutely. It sounds like there's a little more than half of the new fund that's been consumed, but there's almost half left as of Sunday.
Correct.
And we should point out, with any latency between now and when this airs, we are speaking on May the 5th. So we're referring to Sunday the 3rd.
Yep.
So Chris, between the EIDL and the PPP, there's some nuance in terms of what is a grant, what is a loan, what is a forgivable loan. Can you walk us through those 2 programs and just how they work structurally, and what a law firm might expect to be something that needs to be repaid from these programs, and what is a straight up grant that doesn't need to be repaid?
Sure. So we'll start with the EIDL. This is the one that's straight from the SBA. And again, if you kind of recall, that's kind of, think about the natural disaster scenario of the assistance that's being given. So in the EIDL program, you can apply for up to a $2 million loan that would need to be repaid over a period of a couple of years. The most often, what we're seeing the most often in our clients is they are applying for the first part of that EIDL, which is up to a $10,000 grant. So they aren't really going for the loan part of that. They are getting grant money that comes in pretty quickly, usually within a week or two. And that money does not have to be repaid, and it's not really tied to payroll.
Is that the grant that's $1,000 per employee up to $10,000?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
So a law firm could look at the number of employees they have essentially, and they would apply that to the size of the grant they would receive.
And in order to do that, you go onto the SBA website. It's a very straightforward thing. There probably are a dozen or so check boxes about, describing your situation and various statements about your need. You fill in information about the business, the company itself, the ownership, and you provide a routing and bank account number. And the SBA takes that and then figures out the grant amount and moves that money into your bank account.
And you said that happens within a week or two. That's pretty fast.
That's pretty fast. I think on the website, they actually say within 36 hours. What we've seen is it's, a week or two, but
36 government hours.
There you go. They didn't say which 36, I suppose. Maybe that's
and is the application for the loan one and the same, or is the loan a separate application if you're going for the EIDL loan?
For the EIDL loan, there is a follow-on step, and I have not really gone through that step with anybody, so I'm not sure what all's involved in that, but it is it's a kind of a second chapter to that.
Okay. And curious, what do you see in terms of the success rates on the EIDL, in terms of law firms being able to show that economic hardship and then receive that grant up to $10,000?
The only data points I really have are from our client base, but I think our numbers on there are running maybe more like 40%.
Okay.
What I'm not sure about though is how many applied.
Right.
There are a lot of people who were kind of questioning, oh, do I really, does that really count for me? Should I do both? Or I did the PPP, so I'm not sure I should go back and do the other one. So it's like it seems like most of the people who applied are getting it, but I don't really have any good hard numbers on that one.
Sure. Fair enough. In the folks that are getting it, do you have a sense for, hey, here's a line that helped push them over in terms of qualifying for the grant versus not?
Not in terms of any specific wording or anything. I think really there's a statement of, I'm not even sure if it's more than a checkbox about like you're making an attestation that, I am in economic distress because of this emergency, because of this disaster, and please help.
Right. Great. So let's move on to talk about the PPP then. Tell us a little bit about the structural aspects of the PPP. It's a loan that can be forgiven if you meet certain qualification criteria.
Yep. So the way the PPP works is when you apply, you are doing some calculations looking backwards at the last year or so of your payroll, and there are a few different time periods you can choose between, but think of it as going back a year.
Okay.
And you get your average monthly payroll expense. And that includes things like if you match a 401k or if you provide health care to your employees, you're part of the premium for that, as well as their gross pay.
Mm-hmm.
So you take that number, that average monthly number, and you multiply it by 2.5, and that becomes your loan amount. So it's basically, if you think about it, that's 10 weeks of payroll is the amount of your loan. Once you get that money, you have 8 weeks in which to spend it. So inside of that 8 weeks, you need to continue to pay people. But then you can also include a couple of other items that are forgivable. And those are your rent, your utilities, if you have debt service, like if you have a mortgage instead of rent, you can count the interest on that mortgage since you aren't really paying rent in that case. So there are a few things like that, in addition to that expanded kind of payroll definition, that you need to take care of in those 8 weeks. So you got 10 weeks worth of money, and then you've got 8 weeks worth of payroll plus the rent and those other things, and it kind of sort of ties to that. It kind of drives you to that same dollar amount. Once those 8 weeks are up, then you can go back to your bank and say, dear bank, you loaned me this money. I did what I did what the program asked. I kept my employees paid. I kept my doors open. Would you please forgive this loan? And you provide them with the documentation that they would need to show that you really complied.
Okay, a couple of detail-oriented questions just on what you've outlined to this point, Chris. Do you need to keep 100% of your payroll on board, or how does it work if you may want to make a partial reduction in force, but you want to keep, for example, the majority of your folks on board?
So there are kind of 3 areas of testing, if you will, to see if you have complied. The first one is, it's a payroll program. So out of that money, 75% or more of it has to be spent on payroll. So you can't have just a little bit of payroll and then a whole bunch of rent, for instance, and call that good. So 75% of the funds have to go towards payroll. If they do, then the rest of the funds can go towards those other approved expenses. So that's the first test.
Got it.
The second test is a full-time equivalent employee test. So over the course of the 8 weeks, you have to be tracking your the number of full-time equivalent employees you have, and you compare that number to one of a couple of look-back periods to say, well, for instance, January and February of this year is one of the periods. I had 10 employees on average through January and February. Do I have 10 employees on average for the period of that 8-week spending period? If you do, you're good to go. If you have that partial reduction type of a thing, so I've only got 8 now, well, then you would only be eligible to be 80% of that money forgiven.
Okay. And is that just straight prorated then? Okay.
Here's one thing I say yes very confidently. Here's the big thing about the payroll protection program right now is, there was a lot of startup and a lot of clarifications that were coming rapid fire out of the SBA during the kind of application process and the startup. And right now there haven't been a lot of clarifications about the forgiveness side of life, and everybody's anticipating those are going to be coming out in the next couple of weeks. But like all laws, all programs of this size, it gets written up, it gets put in place, and then the questions start rolling in. What about this and what about that? And there's clarity that is needed. The American Institute of CPAs, the AICPA, has got a list of such questions where they've said, oh, what about this situation and what about that? We're going to need help here, and those are going to come. And so I'm sure that what we're saying today and what we're hearing and reading today is going to get refined. I don't think the structural part of it's going to change, but when you get down into the weeds, there are definitely going to be some things.
So
let me go back to one other thing. Is there were 3 criteria three tests about this. So we had the 75% test, we had the full-time employee test. There is also a test for salary reductions. Okay. So if any individual had more than a 25% reduction in pay, then that also is going to play into that forgiveness quotient.
Okay.
In all the cases, everything is pointing towards is not a binary situation. It's not like you make the grade and get forgiveness, or you don't and you don't get forgiveness. Everything is reading like it's a percentage game, and you got this pile of money. you've spent it in the way that the weeks unfolded, and so it's going to be forgiven. This percentage of it will be forgiven. The remaining percentage, remember, is a loan. This whole thing was the PPP loan that you took out.
Right.
So that loan is got a 2-year term at a 1% interest rate. So for a lot of people, even if they weren't, if they had pay force or workforce reductions, think about a restaurant. I mean, we're in the legal world, and so it's not quite the same. Think about a restaurant or a bar, and they were closed. Their staff is largely gone, or a restaurant might still have a couple people doing curbside service. So they don't have a lot. They may not have a lot of levers to pull to say, I used to have 30 people, now I got 6. They can't go hire 24 people magically to do nothing.
Right.
So in those kind of cases, it's not the end of the world if it's not forgiven. It still could be a very valuable asset to your company. You've got a loan at 1% for 2 years when you don't know what the fall is going to hold and what when the courts are going to open and all those kind of things. That's not necessarily a bad thing if it's not forgiven.
Yeah, well, it sounds like you've clarified, I think, so many important points about the program. And I do think there are many folks that believe that it is a binary system and that you do need to meet those criteria in a really black and white kind of way. But the way you've articulated the way the program works, it really sounds like almost a no regrets kind of thing for most law firms. If you are confident you're going to continue operating beyond the pandemic and you want to create that bridge for your staff, this sounds like an amazing program that in the worst case scenario, you get partially forgiven, and what is not forgiven is one of the best loans you could hope for in terms of the repayment period and the interest rate.
Exactly. Yeah. I was talking with one of our clients within the last week or so who doesn't have a line of credit associated with their business. They've got their regular operating account and all of that type of stuff. And as we kind of put together the kind of forecasting of here's what the payroll situation's like, here's what your loan is, she was going to end up with, I think, $40,000 or $50,000 that wasn't going to be able to be repaid because she's lost some staff. And we started talking about it, and she's like, that's going to be, in effect, that's going to become my line of credit, because
right.
I can keep that money on hand and pay 1% interest on it. And even if I just keep it till the end of the year, it'll be there if I need it in the fall. And I'm going to pay a few $100s for that, to be able to do that. If I don't need it, I'll just pay it back to the bank, and kind of we walk away and we're done, and everybody's happy, and we've emerged into the new chapter.
That's right. And by the way, you're getting this loan with very little scrutiny, really, at a time where getting any other kind of loan, secured or otherwise, is going to be way more difficult than it was pre-COVID-19.
Yep, that's a great point. These are not collateralized. That you're not putting your house on the line or your business on the line. The SBA is backing it, so the banks are covered, and really, particularly in our kind of sized world, I'm not going to say there is not scrutiny, because they are going to be looking at these things. Where you're seeing headlines about that, though, they're talking about those big loans. They're talking about the $2 million and up loans that are going to get a lot of scrutiny, and they're going to really be looked at to say, was that really a necessity? When you're talking about a small law office in the uncertainty of the times and a $50,000 PPP loan, I don't think there are going to be a lot of people who would dispute that it was an appropriate application.
Yeah, I think this is where most Americans feel like the funds should be going, not to the Shake Shacks of the world.
Yep.
So, Chris, not to put words in your mouth, but is it fair to say that if you're a small law firm, you should be applying for the PPP almost on an absolute basis, or are there exceptions where you believe that law firms would not want to apply for this program?
Well, I mean, I think the whole program is, I mean, it is really based around, is there a need? So if you're in a situation where, you are so well capitalized that there is no chance that you need
Hmm.
this money, then probably leave that for somebody else who's struggling to keep people on board and make payroll.
Right.
I think, I think in general, I think you said it well, and that, most of the people, most of the firms that I know of, at least in this, kind of size range, are not sitting on, millions and millions of dollars in their
Right.
operating account and going to
That's
sail
right.
through without problem.
Well, especially
If
when you think about almost the structural way that most law firms pay out retained earnings at the end of every year and kind of start
Yep,
from zero in a lot of ways at the beginning of every fiscal year. To your point,
yep,
there's a lot of firms that have 1 or maybe 2 months of runway, and it feels like the forward thinking firms maybe have 3 months of
yep,
runway, and that's about where things max out. And you don't have VC style investment, for example, in law firms because of the ownership related rules for law firms. So it feels like maybe more than most businesses, most law firms fall into the sweet spot for what this
yep.
PPP is targeting from a support standpoint.
Yeah, and there's commentary um, from some of the government officials, and I'm struggling for a name here, but there wasn't a requirement that you reinvest your personal money in order to see your firm through, and that was like the strategy for how to work your way through that. If the firm, if the firm's got money, if the firm has access to capital, that's one thing. And certainly, like where you're seeing the venture capital backed firms or the hedge fund owned firms, mostly not law firms, but the companies that are owned by a hedge fund, they've got the capital available to them.
Right.
If you're talking about a small group of partners running a law firm, there's nothing that says that they should be going and taking a mortgage out on their house just so they can put money back into the business
Right.
and avoid taking the PPP. That's not what was intended by any of this.
So, Chris, you've done a phenomenal job of walking us through, many of the important aspects of these programs and some of the provisos to be aware of if you are applying for them. Are there any questions that you're hearing from your clients about these programs that we haven't touched on to this point?
I think really in terms of the structure of them, not so much. I think maybe right now the one question that we do hear is, is it too late? I didn't apply yet. What should I
Yep.
do? And I think we've covered that. I mean, as of right now, today when we're speaking, I would be seeking out. If you're with a big bank, I would probably be seeking out a community bank or a local credit union or one of those types of lenders. We seem to be getting a lot better success rate with them for small firms because when you're with the Bank of America and you're a small law firm, you're probably not a significant blip on their radar screen. But gosh, just like we're all small community businesses. If you could take your business to a small community bank, what better way to kind of
Right.
pay it forward as they are helping you keep the doors open and get one of these loans. And they've been very successful in delivering for people. So that's probably the biggest question. There's all kinds of in the weeds accounting. Can I count this and can I count that? The biggest thing that we're advising people is we've got some tracking spreadsheets set up, and it's just like, let's just make sure we're capturing the stuff, make sure it's organized. It's just like you prepare for one of your cases. You got to put the stuff together so that it tells the story, so that it's all concise and easy to understand. And when we go to talk to the bank about forgiveness, we've got the packet all put together, we
Right.
hand them the binder and say, here it is, any questions? And the answer is going to be, nope, we see that you've done the work and we see that you followed the rules, and you can, work through the mechanics of the forgiveness process, whatever that turns out to look like with each bank.
Excellent. So if you have not applied for these programs, money's still available. Get to it if you need the funds.
Yep.
Super useful download on all of these programs and all the nuance around how they work, Chris. Really appreciate that. Maybe to wrap up our conversation, a couple of questions to close. Outside of these stimulus options, you work with law firms. You've worked with law firms for years, and you're dealing with them obviously in this point of acute crisis. But you've got a breadth of experience over many years in terms of helping law firms manage their financials and how to be profitable and manage cash flow and everything else that you need to do to run a thriving business. Do you have any advice, like I said, above and beyond these stimulus options in terms of how to manage the financial aspect of your firm to get to the other side of this crisis?
Wow, that's a great question. Let me think about that for a second. Well, I think really it's getting the other side of this crisis is not going to be significant. It's the same things that we do to run a profitable law firm or to keep things moving forward
Right.
in the normal times. So, I mean, it's really kind of basic blocking and tackling. It's do you have a budget? Are you following that budget? Are you watching the details about what's really going out the door? We get so busy with so many things we're doing that it's surprising how many times, as the firm grows, the chaos ensues, and all of a sudden one day the partner wakes up and they start looking back at some details and they go like, what do you mean we spent all this money on that? It's like, now's the time to not accidentally fall down that hole.
Right.
Make sure you're really doing the basics well. If you're a firm that works on retainers, get the retainers topped up. Make sure that you've got money in that trust account to pay your invoices when it's time to do the billing.
Yeah, hugely important
let them
point.
run out, man. That's like, again, see that a lot with the successful firms. We do billing for people, right? So we're actually the ones who are in Clio creating the invoice, applying the trust funds, doing all those things. And for some of our firms, it's like billing day is payday, because you're running the bills and you're applying the trust money and you're making the transfer, and that account's solid. If you don't do that, then billing day is just kind of another day, and you're sending them out and you're waiting for clients to hopefully send you some money. And by the way, those clients are facing all the same challenges that you are right now. So I'd say make sure if you're in the type of practice that lets you do that, make sure you're looking at your trust funds and getting them topped up.
Yeah. A great pro tip I've reiterated a couple of times on this podcast came from Erin Levine, I think in our second episode, and she commented on the fact she's seen a lot of success asking for clients to top up their retainers, even in advance of them being fully exhausted. And I think if you've got a good relationship with your clients, there's a lot of goodwill there in many cases, and they'll happily do that. And that can do so much to help you from a cash flow perspective.
Absolutely.
Well, Chris, this has been an enormously useful discussion. I'd love to follow up with you downstream, and we can assess what the latest state of these programs and potentially new programs are in a future episode, if you'd be up for it.
I'd love to.
And to wrap up, would love to hear a message from you that you might want to leave to our listeners, a parting thought.
I think for me, it is get into the other guy's shoes, especially now. We've got such a crazy wide range of experiences going on over the last month or two. And, I live in the Midwest in a suburb, and, we've been blessed to not be particularly affected by this. It's been a huge, inconvenience in our lives and all that stuff, but we haven't lost anybody, and it's been a different experience than the ones I see on TV of somebody in New York City. And so that doesn't
mean you've got a bit
that,
more integrated social distancing there.
Exactly. So I mean, it's like just let everybody make their own choices about what they're doing. Don't try and make them wrong. Don't try and make yours right. Just live your life and do the best that you can, and let the other folks do their thing too.
Yeah, I agree. I think empathy is more important today than ever. So a great note to end on. Well, thank you again, Chris. This has just been a fire hose of useful information. Really appreciate you taking the time, and we'll talk again soon.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Thanks for joining us on Daily Matters today, a podcast from Clio. Rate and review wherever you get your podcasts, and subscribe so that you never miss an episode. Daily Matters is produced by Andrew Booth, Sam Rosenthal, and Derek Boland, and hosted by yours truly, Jack Newton. Thanks also to Clio, the world's leading cloud-based legal technology provider, for supporting this podcast. If you'd like to learn more about Clio, please visit clio.com.